Well, I want to turn to Mary now because you have had a remarkable story. You've written a whole book about it, nearly dying in a kayaking accident in Chile back in 1999. And I know you wrote a whole book about it, but can you briefly tell us the story of what happened?
I'll tell it very briefly and try to address some of the more detailed aspects that will address some of the more scientific questions that I perhaps didn't focus on in the book. And my experience began when my husband and I went to Chile to kayak. And we are avid kayakers, so this was not on a lark. And we decided to go on a river that's well known for waterfalls. It's something that was certainly within our skill set. And we were kayaking down this section of river with friends of ours who are professionals that do this for a living. And when I came to the first big drop, the circumstances were such that I had to go over the main part of the waterfall instead of a smaller chute. And so I started over the drop, which was about 15 feet in that range. And when I saw the bottom, I certainly saw tremendous hydraulics, no clean outflow. And I have to preface this first by saying that I did grow up as a child of the 1950s, was taken to Sunday school, never really expected to incorporate that into what I was or into my life. And then I went off to college and medical school and residency and the whole deal. And I absolutely would say that before this experience, I would have responded yes if someone said, "Do you believe in God?" But I also absolutely subscribed and joined what I really feel is its own religion, which is really the religion of the intellect. You know, if I'm smart enough, if I spend enough money, and if I spend enough time looking at things, I will be able to answer all the questions that we're talking about. And so I, by no one's stretch of the imagination, would have been called a particularly religious person or a zealot, and really had not given much thought to the death experience.
No, to return to the story of the accident. So you went over the
Yep.
waterfall.
So I went over the waterfall, and the front of the boat, instead of hitting the bottom and being flipped out and tumbled around and spit out downstream, the front of the boat became pinned or stuck in the rocks, and I was immediately submerged under 8 or 10 feet of water. And so there were no air pockets. I was under solid water, so that I wasn't even visible from the surface. And I am a spine surgeon. I'm very calm and didn't panic, didn't do those things. It wasn't the first time I was under the water. Tried to free the boat, tried to free me from the boat. Became clear that nothing was working, and I'm a very pragmatic person. I knew that I was about to drown, and I asked that God's will be done. And the moment I asked that, I was immediately overcome with a very, very physical sensation of being held and comforted and reassured that everything was fine. My husband would be fine, my 4 young children would be fine, regardless of whether I lived or died. And we then went through a bit of a life review, and we looked at events not in isolation or judgment, but really looked at the beauty that came out of every event. And I was well aware of my circumstances. I could feel the water slowly sucking my body over the front deck of the boat. And I could feel my knees bending back on themselves and bones breaking and ligaments tearing. And at this point, I've been asked many times, well, did you feel yourself become unconscious? And I would say that I had been conscious and then more conscious. And I was still me. I was still my same somewhat cynical, analytical self. And my thought balloon off to the side was experiencing this and thinking, this is strange. And I thought about, okay, I know how long I've been underwater.
How long were you underwater?
Well, from the time that the people I was boating with identified where underwater I probably was to the time they initiated CPR was 15 minutes on the clock. And they would absolutely say that leading up to that point was another 15 minutes. So they are very clear that they believe I was underwater without oxygen for 30 minutes. I tend to focus on the 15 minutes because that is the shortest, absolutely objective measure of time. But I felt my body coming out of the boat. I felt my spirit peeling away from my body, and I could feel then my spirit rise up and out of the river. And I was immediately greeted by a group of somethings, people, spirits, beings. They were people that I absolutely knew on a very core level, had known me and loved me as long as I had existed. I knew them, I loved them, and we were all overjoyed. And I was very surprised with this whole process. I didn't have any preconceptions. And there was a shift in time, dimension, not quite sure what the words were, so that they could take me down this incredibly beautiful pathway toward this great dome structure of sorts that I knew was essentially the point of no return. I knew it was heaven, whatever word you want to put on it, and I could hardly wait. At the same time, I could look back at the scene at the river, and what had happened is my body came out of the boat, went downstream underwater, and actually bumped into one of the guys downstream. They pulled me out, started CPR, and I could see them do CPR. One guy was never able to divorce himself from the fact that it was me, his friend, kept calling to me to come back and take a breath. And I eventually would say, okay, and I'd interrupt our progress. I'd go back down this path, lie down, take a breath, and then rejoin these people, these spirits. I eventually did make it to this threshold, although he kept calling me back again and again and again. It was really very irritating. I did.
So you didn't want to come back?
Well, I hate to say it because my daughter is here, but one of the remarkable things, and really one of the things that was a great surprise to me, was an absolute sense of being home and an absolute sense of looking at my body, recognizing that that was my body, and that represented my life here. It represented my children. It represented my husband, and I had a great life. I had a husband that loved me. I loved my children more than I could ever imagine loving something on earth. I was not trying to escape something. I had everything to come back for, yet I had absolutely no intention of coming back, no desire whatsoever, part of which is I'd been reassured. It wasn't just, that's actually why I didn't tell my story for many years. I never wanted my children to know that I hadn't wanted to come back. I didn't want them to feel that they hadn't been enough of a reason.